My name is Ethan, and I know what I saw that night was real. No one believes me, but I don't care. I was there. I heard the voices. I saw the reflection that wasn't mine. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Just me and my best friend, Caleb, camping near Hollow Lake. We had been coming here for years, but that night was different. The air was colder than usual, and the lake was unnaturally still. Like a sheet of black glass dot around midnight, I woke up to a sound soft whispers drifting across the water. At first, I thought it was Caleb talking in his sleep, but when I turned to wake him, I froze. Caleb wasn't in his sleeping bag. Panicked, I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the campsite. Then I saw him standing at the edge of the water, staring into the lake. His posture was unnaturally stiff, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The moment I called his name, he turned his head slightly, but his reflection in the water didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. A deep, unnatural dread settled in my gut. Something was wrong. I took a step closer, but as soon as I did, Caleb's reflection began to smile. A slow, eerie grin that stretched too wide across his face. The real Caleb, however, remained motionless, his expression blank. I knew I had to get him away from there. I rushed forward, grabbed his arm, and yanked him back. The moment I did, the reflection's grin disappeared. But before the water settled, I swear I saw something else in the lake. A pair of hands reaching up from the depths. Caleb collapsed as if something had been holding him upright. He was pale, shivering, muttering something under his breath. I had to drag him back to the tent. He wouldn't tell me what happened, just kept whispering, "Don't look at them. Don't let them see you." We packed up and left at dawn, but Caleb hasn't been the same since. He avoids mirrors, covers windows, refuses to be near water. I didn't understand why until last night. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection, when I saw something move behind me. I turned around. Nothing was there, but when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was still turned around. It's watching me now, waiting, and I think it's smiling. My name is Alex, and I should have never stepped into that circle. We thought it was just a pile of old bones. We were wrong. It was supposed to be an ordinary hike. Just me, Jamie, and Nate exploring the deep woods near Blackwood Trail. We had heard stories about the place, whispers of rituals, missing hikers, strange symbols carved into trees, but we were skeptics until we found it. A circle dot. It wasn't just a random arrangement of sticks or stones. No, this was deliberate. Human bones, bleached white with age, placed in a perfect ring in the clearing. In the center, a weathered notebook sat atop a small mound of earth. Nate, being the reckless idiot he was, stepped right into the circle before either of us could stop him. The wind shifted instantly. The towering trees swayed violently. Though no storm had been forecasted, the air became thick, suffocating, heavy with the scent of decay. Jamie grabbed my arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Alex, the bones are moving." I didn't want to believe her, but she was right. The bones twitched, as if something was stirring beneath them. Then the whispering started. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I recognized. A chorus of voices rising from the earth itself, angry, desperate. Nate had frozen in the center of the circle, eyes wide, body trembling. I can't move," he stammered, voice barely audible over the growing hum of the whispers. Then, something reached up. A skeletal hand burst through the dirt, wrapping around Nate's ankle. He screamed. We tried to grab him, pull him away, but it was useless. The ground beneath the circle had become something else, arriving, shifting void that swallowed him up to his knees, then his waist. "Break the circle," Jamie screamed, kicking the bones aside. The moment the ring was broken, the whispers turned to screams. Nate was thrown out of the hole, landing in a heap at our feet. The wind stopped. The forest fell deathly silent. But The hole where he had been sinking, it remained open, and inside, we saw them. Dozens of figures, hollow-eyed, skeletal, reaching up. We ran. We never spoke about it again. Nate refused to acknowledge what happened, but I know he never sleeps anymore. Jamie avoids the woods like they carry a plague. And me, I still hear the whispers, especially when I'm alone, especially when it's quiet, and I know the circle is waiting to be completed. My name is Ethan, and I know what I saw that night was real. No one believes me, but I don't care. I was there. I heard the voices. I saw the reflection. That wasn't mine. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Just me and my best friend, Caleb, camping near Hollow Lake. We had been coming here for years, but that night was different. The air was colder than usual, and the lake was unnaturally still. Like a sheet of black glass dot around midnight, I woke up to a sound, soft whispers drifting across the water. At first I thought it was Caleb talking in his sleep, but when I turned to wake him, I froze. Caleb wasn't in his sleeping bag. Panicked, I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the campsite. Then I saw him standing at the edge of the water, staring into the lake. His posture was unnaturally stiff, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The moment I called his name, he turned his head slightly, but his reflection in the water didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. A deep, unnatural dread settled in my gut. Something was wrong. I took a step closer, but as soon as I did, Caleb's reflection began to smile. A slow, eerie grin that stretched too wide across his face. The real Caleb, however, remained motionless, his expression blank. I knew I had to get him away from there. I rushed forward, grabbed his arm, and yanked him back. The moment I did, the reflection's grin disappeared. But before the water settled, I swear I saw something else in the lake. A pair of hands reaching up from the depths. Caleb collapsed as if something had been holding him upright. He was pale, shivering, muttering something under his breath. I had to drag him back to the tent. He wouldn't tell me what happened, just kept whispering, "Don't look at them. Don't let them see you." We packed up and left at dawn, but Caleb hasn't been the same since. He avoids mirrors, covers windows, refuses to be near water. I didn't understand why until last night. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection, when I saw something move behind me. I turned around. Nothing was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was still turned around. It's watching me now, waiting, and I think it's smiling. My name is Ethan, and I know what I saw that night was real. No one believes me, but I don't care. I was there. I heard the voices. I saw the reflection that wasn't mine. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway. Just me and my best friend, Caleb, camping near Hollow Lake. We had been coming here for years, but that night was different. The air was colder than usual, and the lake was unnaturally still. Like a sheet of black glass dot around midnight, I woke up to a sound, soft whispers drifting across the water. At first I thought it was Caleb talking in his sleep, but when I turned to wake him, I froze. Caleb wasn't in his sleeping bag. Panicked, I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the campsite. Then I saw him standing at the edge of the water, staring into the lake. His posture was unnaturally stiff, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The moment I called his name, he turned his head slightly, but his reflection in the water didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. A deep, unnatural dread settled in my gut. Something was wrong. I took a step closer, but as soon as I did, Caleb's reflection began to smile. A slow, eerie grin that stretched too wide across his face. The real Caleb, however, remained motionless, his expression blank. I knew I had to get him away from there. I rushed forward, grabbed his arm, and yanked him back. The moment I did, the reflection's grin disappeared. But before the water settled, I swear I saw something else in the lake. A pair of hands reaching up from the depths. Caleb collapsed as if something had been holding him upright. He was pale, shivering, muttering something under his breath. I had to drag him back to the tent. He wouldn't tell me what happened, just kept whispering, "Don't look at them. Don't let them see you." We packed up and left at dawn, but Caleb hasn't been the same since. He avoids mirrors, covers windows, refuses to be near water. I didn't understand why until last night. I was brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection, when I saw something move behind me. I turned around. Nothing was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was still turned around. It's watching me now, waiting, and I think it's smiling. My name is Ryan, and I don't know how to explain what happened that night. I keep telling myself it wasn't real, but every time I close my eyes, I see it again. The house, the circle, the thing that came back with us. It started as a joke. 4 of Usme, Liam, Jess, and Claire decided to explore an old mansion outside town. It had been abandoned for decades, standing alone in a sea of dead trees. The locals whispered about it, called it cursed, said something was left unfinished there long ago. We thought it was nonsense, just another ghost story to keep kids away. We broke in through a back window, our flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The house smelled of mold and dust, the air stale as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. We wandered through the grand halls, laughing at the decayed furniture and peeling wallpaper, until we found the basement door. It was locked, but Liam kicked it open like he had something to prove. That's when we saw it, a circle, drawn in black ash, covered nearly the entire basement floor. Strange symbols surrounded it, pulsing as if they were alive. At the center lay a pile of melted candles and what looked like old, dried bones. The air was heavier down there, pressing against us like unseen hands. It felt wrong. We should have left, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. Jess stepped forward first, running her fingers along the symbols. The moment she touched one, the room seemed to shift. A gust of wind, impossible in a basement, swept through, snuffing out our flashlights. We scrambled to turn them back on, but when the beams flickered to life, Jess was standing inside the circle, and she wasn't alone. A shape loomed behind her, barely visible, its form shifting like smoke in the dim light. It was tall, impossibly tall, with hollow eyes that burned red. Jess was frozen, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. Then the thing touched her. She collapsed. We dragged her out of there, running faster than we ever had in our lives. She wasn't unconscious, but she wasn't herself either. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, just stared at nothing as we drove away. Back at Liam's place, we tried to snap her out of it. We shook her, screamed her name. Nothing. Then she suddenly turned to me and whispered something in a voice that wasn't hers. It chose me. That was 3 days ago. Jess is still catatonic, barely moving, barely breathing, but at night, she stands. She walks to the window and just watches. I swear I see shadows moving around her, stretching toward her, like they're waiting. Don't know what we did. I don't know what we brought back. But I know one thing for sure. Jess isn't Jess anymore. My name is Daniel, and I should have never stepped into that church. What we found inside wasn't meant for us, and now, something is watching me. It was supposed to be just another urban exploration trip. Me, Oliver, and Mia, checking out abandoned places for our YouTube channel. The old church on Hollow Road had been deserted for decades. Its stained glass shattered, its wooden doors rotting on their hinges. But inside, it wasn't just dust and decay waiting for us. The first thing we noticed was the smell, something Metallica like rust, but sharper. The air was thick, suffocating, like stepping into a room that didn't want us there. At the altar, Rows of melted black candles surrounded a large, circular symbol carved deep into the wooden floor. Symbols neither of us recognized, but they felt wrong, as if they weren't just drawings, but warnings. "This looks like a ritual," Mia muttered, tracing the carvings with her fingertips. "But it's not finished." Oliver snorted. "Maybe that's for the best. We should have left then." But I saw something in the corner, an old, leather-bound book resting on a pulpit. The pages were brittle, covered in symbols and text in a language I didn't understand. But there was one word I could read, written over and over in jagged, desperate handwriting. "Do not complete the ritual." The words sent a shiver down my spine. That's when we heard it. A deep, guttural whisper. Not coming from behind us, not coming from the halls, but from the walls themselves. The wooden beams groaned as if something was pressing against them, trying to break free. The candles flickered wildly, their flames stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling. And then, the door slammed shut. The whispering grew louder, the words blending together into a chorus of something ancient, something hungry. Mia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to leave, now." Oliver turned to run, but as he did, his foot scuffed against the carved symbol on the floor, smudging the ash dot. The room went silent, and then the screaming started. It came from everywhere. At once, a shrill, inhuman wail that rattled our bones. The symbols burned, glowing a deep, hellish red. The shadows stretched, moving in ways that defied logic. I grabbed Oliver and Mia, dragging them toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The church wouldn't let us go. Then, in the center of the symbol, something began to rise. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even alive. It was darkness given form, a figure with too many arms and no face, writhing like something that had just woken up hungry. The book, the warning. We had completed the ritual. I don't know how we got out. One moment, we were screaming. The next, we were outside, gasping for air on the church steps. The doors were shut tight behind us, and the whispers had stopped. But something changed that night. Oliver hasn't spoken since. Mia refuses to leave her house after sunset, and me, I keep seeing something in the corners of my room, a shape waiting, watching, I think the ritual isn't over. I think it followed us home. My name is Ethan, and I swear to you, what I'm about to tell you is real. It happened to me and my friends just a few nights ago. We thought it was just another camping trip, another adventure in an abandoned town. But we were wrong. Dead wrong. But we had heard the rumors about Blackwood Hollow, a ghost town deep in the forest. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed people who went there never returned. But we were young, reckless, and eager for a thrill. So we packed up our tents, grabbed our flashlights, and headed into the woods. The town itself was eerie, frozen in time. Wooden houses with shattered windows stood like forgotten tombstones. The air was thick, heavy, as if the town itself was holding its breath. We set up camp in what seemed to be the town square, right in front of an old barn that had a massive, rusted padlock on it. That should have been our first warning. That night, around midnight, we heard it low, rhythmic chanting, a deep hum carried by the wind, distant, yet close, like whispers crawling inside our ears. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to laugh it off, probably just the wind. But then it grew louder, more distinct, words we couldn't understand, spoken by voices that didn't sound entirely human. Curiosity got the best of us. We followed the sound through the overgrown streets, the wooden planks creaking beneath our feet. The chanting led us back to the barn. But now, the massive padlock was gone, and the doors were slightly ajar, revealing a flickering orange glow inside. Jake, the bravest of you saw, the dumbest, pushed the doors open. What we saw inside still haunts me. A group of figures, cloaked in tattered robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They stood in a perfect circle around an altar, upon which lay something, or someone. Candles lined the floor, casting long, writhing shadows. The figures swayed, chanting in unison, their voices dripping with something ancient and malevolent. Then, as if sensing us, they stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Slowly, they turned their heads toward us, their faces still hidden in darkness. But the worst part, the shadows on the walls. They kept moving. They twisted and writhed like living things, breaking away from their owners. And then, they lunged. We ran. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't stop to breathe. We just ran, our own shadows stretching and distorting unnaturally beneath the moonlight. I heard Jake scream, but I didn't dare stop. We reached the truck, slammed the doors, and peeled out of there so fast, I barely remembered starting the engine. When we finally stopped, miles away from Blackwood Hollow, we took a head count. Jake was missing. We called the cops, told them he got lost in the woods. We didn't dare tell them the truth, but we knew. We knew. The next morning, I found something in my backpack, a small, withered piece of parchment. There was only one sentence written on it, in smeared black ink. The shadows have claimed what was theirs. Do not return. My name is Sarah, and I can't escape the mirror in my basement. When I bought the old house, I thought I was lucky. A beautiful Victorian home for an absurdly low price, too good to be true. The only downside, a locked room in the basement. The realtor dismissed it, saying the previous owner had stored old furniture there and lost the key. I should have left it alone. For weeks, I tried to ignore it, but every time I went downstairs, I felt it. A presence, like something was just beyond that door, waiting. One night, curiosity won. I pried the door open with a crowbar, my breath hitching as the wood splintered apart. Inside was nothing but a single, full-length mirror. Its frame was ancient, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. The glass was dark, warped, like looking into water instead of a reflection. The second I stepped inside, the air turned heavy as if the room had been sealed for a reason. That's when I saw it. My reflection blinked a second too late. I froze, my pulse hammering. Slowly, I lifted my hand. My reflection followed. But something felt off. The movements were delayed, unnatural. And then, it smiled. I didn't. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut. But the moment I turned to run, I heard it knocking from inside the mirror. I barely slept that night. When I woke up, the basement door was ajar. The mirror had been moved. It now faced the doorway, as if someone or something wanted me to look. I threw a sheet over it, locked the basement door. But the knocking hasn't stopped. It's louder now, closer, and tonight, when I checked my bedroom mirror, my reflection was still smiling. My name is Ben, and I know what I saw in my grandparents' basement. They lived in a quiet, old house on the edge of town. Every summer, my parents sent me there for a few weeks. It was boring, no internet, no friends nearby, just endless bookshelves, and the eerie silence of a home that felt too big for two people. But the worst part was the basement. I was never allowed to go down there. Old wiring, my grandfather always said. Rotten steps, my grandmother would add, but I never believed them. I'd seen my grandfather disappear down there plenty of times, always locking the door behind him. One night, curiosity won. I waited until they were asleep, crept down the creaky stairs, and pressed my ear against the basement door. Silence. But when I turned the knob, it wasn't locked. The air hit me first thick, damp, and cold. I clicked on my flashlight, revealing rows of dusty shelves and rusted tools. But at the very back, something was covered with a sheet. I don't know why, but I felt sick just looking at it. My hands were shaking as I reached for the fabric and yanked it away. Underneath was a mirror, a massive antique thing, its frame covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. The glass was dark, murky, like it hadn't reflected anything in years. I lifted my flashlight, trying to see myself in it. I wish I hadn't, because when my reflection finally appeared, it didn't move with me. My chest tightened. I stepped back. The other me didn't. It just stood there, staring, its eyes slightly too wide, its grin just a little too sharp. Then, it stepped forward. I ran. I nearly tripped, scrambling up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My grandparents found me the next morning, shaking, refusing to explain why I had locked myself in my room all night. They never asked, but I know they knew. The next day, the basement door was chained shut. My grandfather told me I was never to go near it again. That was 10 years ago. I haven't been back since. But last night, I got a call. My grandparents have passed, and they left me the house. My name is Daniel, and I should have never opened that door. We had just moved into the house, an old Victorian fixer-upper on the outskirts of town. My wife, Claire, loved its charm, the antique fixtures, the creaky wooden floors. But what intrigued me most was the basement, a dark, damp space with an old stone foundation. The first time I explored it, I noticed something strange. A second door, set deep into the wall, covered in layers of chipped paint. It had no handle, no keyhole, just a door, forgotten by time. Don't mess with it, Claire warned. Some things should stay shut, but curiosity is dangerous. That night, after Claire had gone to bed, I went back down with a crowbar. The second I touched the wood, a shiver ran through me, like the house itself was warning me. I hesitated, then forced the crowbar between the door and its frame. With a loud crack, the door popped open. A wave of stale air hit me, thick with the scent of earth and rot. Beyond the door was a narrow tunnel, stretching into pitch blackness. I aimed my flashlight down the passage, but the beam barely cut through the darkness. The walls were lined with deep, erratic scratches as if something had been trying to get out. Then, from deep within the tunnel, I heard it. A single knock that I should have closed the door. I should have run upstairs and never looked back. But I didn't. I stepped forward. The dirt beneath my feet felt soft, almost too soft, like something had been disturbed. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Then, at the very end of the passage, I saw it, a chair, old, wooden, sitting alone, in the darkness. The floor around it was covered in deep, jagged footprints, circling it over and over again. And above it, carved into the dirt ceiling, were words scratched in frantic, uneven letters. Do not turn around. The second I read it, I heard breathing behind me. I ran. I don't remember getting back to the house, but I must have slammed the basement door shut behind me because, when I woke up in my bed, my hands were covered in dirt. Claire says I was sleepwalking, that I dreamed the whole thing. But every night since then, I've heard the knocks, louder, closer, and last night, I woke up to find the basement door wide open. I think something got out. My name is Mark, and I should have never opened that door. It was locked for a reason. I moved into the house last month. A cheap deal, too good to pass up. A big place with a large basement, perfect for storage, or so I thought. But there was something strange about it. The basement was divided into 2 sections, one wide and empty, and the other separated by an old, locked door. The landlord warned me not to mess with it. It's been sealed for decades, he said. Best to leave it that way. I should have listened. Curiosity got the best of me. I tried ignoring it at first, but every time I went down there, I felt it. A pressure in the air, like the room beyond was watching. One night, I found an old iron key wedged behind the furnace. My heart pounded as I fit it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room. Dust coated the floor, disturbed only by a single object in the center, an old wooden chest. It was latched shut, the wood darkened with age, almost pulsating beneath my fingertips. Then I heard it, a faint scratching from inside the chest. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Maybe it was just a rat. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the scratching turned into tapping, slow, rhythmic, like knuckles knocking against wood. I ran upstairs, slamming the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. But at some point, exhaustion won. When I woke up, something was different. The basement door was open. I know I locked it. I know I did. But now, it was ajar, a sliver of darkness bleeding into the hallway. My stomach twisted. Slowly, I crept downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. The chest was open, and it was empty. I don't remember running back upstairs. I don't remember locking my bedroom door. But I remember the whispers. Soft at first, then growing louder. A voice calling my name. And then, the tapping. Not from the basement this time, from inside my closet. I haven't opened the door since, but every night, the tapping grows closer. The whispers get clearer, and now, I think whatever was in that chest is in my room. My name is Chris, and I can't stay in this house any longer. Not after what we heard in the basement. It started as a joke. My roommates and I, Josh, Emily, and Nate, rented an old house for cheap. The landlord barely spoke about the basement, just muttered something about strange acoustics. We didn't think much of it, until the whispers started at first. They were faint, barely audible, a hushed murmur just below the surface of our hearing. We thought it was the pipes, or maybe the wind sneaking through cracks in the foundation. But as the days passed, the whispers grew clearer. They said our names. Josh was the first to notice. He was up late studying when he heard his name drifting up from the basement vent. He thought it was one of us messing with him, but when he checked, we were all asleep. The next night, it was Emily. She woke up screaming, saying someone had been whispering to her from inside her closet. But when we checked, the only vent in her room led directly to the basement. That's when we decided to investigate. The basement was unfinished, just a cold concrete space with a few rusted shelves. We stood in a circle, listening, waiting. At first, there was nothing. Then, Nate whispered, "If someone is here, say something." Silence. Then, a voice whispered back, "We hear you." We ran, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed us through the house, seeping through the vents, crawling into our ears. I could hear them even when I covered my head with a pillow, always whispering, always listening. Last night, we tried to leave, but the basement door was open, and at the bottom of the stairs, something was standing there. I didn't see its face. I didn't need to. The whispers turned into laughter. We packed whatever we could carry and left before dawn. We didn't look back, but I can still hear them, and I don't think they're done with us. My name is Daniel, and I should have never listened to the trees. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. Just me and my sister, Emma, camping deep in Blackwood Forest. A place so isolated, so quiet, that you could hear your own heartbeat. But, at night, it wasn't quiet. The first night, I woke up to a sound, soft, distant whispers. At first, I thought it was Emma talking in her sleep. But as I sat up, I realized the whispers weren't coming from the tent. They were coming from outside. I unzipped the tent slowly, peering into the darkness. The fire had gone out, leaving only faint moonlight to illuminate the trees. The whispers grew louder, swirling through the branches like wind, except there was no wind. I turned to wake Emma, but she was already sitting up, pale-faced, Do you hear them? I nodded. What are they saying? I strained to listen, my pulse hammering. The voices were overlapping, speaking in hushed tones. And then, I heard it clearly. Come closer. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed Emma's wrist. We're leaving now. We packed in record time, throwing everything into our bags. But as we turned to leave, Emma gasped. Daniel, the trees. I followed her gaze. The trees around us had shifted. The path we had taken to get here was gone. The whispers turned urgent, pressing against my skull. The words twisted, forming something else. Stay, Emma screamed. I grabbed her hand, forcing us to move. We stumbled through the dark, running in the only direction that wasn't completely closed off. The voices rose into a deafening chorus. The branches bending toward us, as if trying to reach then. Silence. We burst into an open field, panting, our ears ringing. The trees stood still, unmoving. Just a normal forest again. We never found our original campsite. We never found that path. On the drive home, Emma refused to speak. She sat in silence, staring at the passing trees. When I finally asked her what was wrong, she just whispered, "They're still whispering." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every second of what had happened. But what truly terrified me was the message I found on my phone the next morning. A voice recording. A single, static-filled whisper. Come back. Now. Every time I pass a wooded area, I feel it. A pull. The trees lean in just slightly when I walk by, as if they remember me, and sometimes, just on the edge of my hearing, I still hear them calling my name. My name is Daniel, and I should have never listened to the trees. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend. Just me and my sister Emma, camping deep in Blackwood Forest. A place so isolated, so quiet, that you could hear your own heartbeat. But, at night, it wasn't quiet. The first night, I woke up to a sound soft, distant whispers. At first, I thought it was Emma talking in her sleep. But as I sat up, I realized the whispers weren't coming from the tent. They were coming from outside. I unzipped the tent slowly, peering into the darkness. The fire had gone out, leaving only faint moonlight to illuminate the trees. The whispers grew louder, swirling through the branches like wind, except there was no wind. I turned to wake Emma, but she was already sitting up, pale-faced. Do you hear them? I nodded. What are they saying? I strained to listen, my pulse hammering. The voices were overlapping, speaking in hushed tones. And then, I heard it clearly. Come closer. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed Emma's wrist. We're leaving now. We packed in record time, throwing everything into our bags. But, as we turned to leave, Emma gasped, Daniel, the trees. I followed her gaze. The trees around us had shifted. The path we had taken to get here was gone. The whispers turned urgent, pressing against my skull. The words twisted, forming something else. Stay, Emma screamed. I grabbed her hand, forcing us to move. We stumbled through the dark, running in the only direction that wasn't completely closed off. The voices rose into a deafening chorus, the branches bending toward us as if trying to reach then. Silence. We burst into an open field, panting, our ears ringing. The trees stood still, unmoving. Just a normal forest again. We never found our original campsite. We never found that path. And now, whenever I walk past a tree, I swear I hear my name being whispered. My name is Eric, and I swear that cabin wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip, just me and my girlfriend, Julia, hiking through the dense Pine Hollow forest. We were miles away from civilization when we spotted ITA cabin. It wasn't marked on any map. The wood looked ancient, but the structure was intact. No graffiti, no broken windows. Like it had been waiting. Maybe we should check it out, Julia suggested, already stepping forward. I hesitated. Something about the place felt wrong. The way the trees bent around it, the way the air felt heavier. But I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I followed. The door wasn't locked. Inside, it was empty. Dust covered the wooden floor, but no furniture. No signs of anyone ever living there. Then, Julia found something stranger. Single, fresh footprint in the dust. Eric, this footprint isn't ours. A chill ran down my spine. That's when we heard it. A soft knock, not from the door, from inside the cabin. I spun, shining my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just walls and dust. But the knocking came. Again, closer. Julia grabbed my hand. We need to leave, now. We bolted outside, sprinting back into the woods. I don't know how long we ran, but when we finally stopped, gasping for air, I turned back to see how far we had come. The cabin was gone, not just distant, not just hidden by trees, completely gone. We searched, we retraced our steps, but there was no clearing, no sign it had ever existed. Just endless unbroken forest. Julia refuses to talk about it. I still check the maps, trying to figure out if we imagined the whole thing. But sometimes, at night, I hear it again. A soft knock, coming from my closet. My name is Jake, and I know what silence truly sounds like. It started as a camping trip. Just me and 3 friends, Ben, Ashley, and Kyle, hiking deep into the Blackwood forest. We wanted to get away from everything, escape the noise of the world. We got our wish. On the second day, we found it. A clearing unlike anything I'd ever seen. The trees were massive, their bark blackened as if scorched, but the strangest part was the silence. No birds, no wind, not even the sound of our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. It was as if the world had hit mute. Ben was the first to notice. Guys, listen, we did, and that was the problem. There was nothing to listen to. Kyle laughed it off. Just a weird dead zone, probably something to do with air pressure or whatever. But Ashley wasn't convinced. She pulled out her phone, recording a video as she whispered, "If you find this, something's wrong with this place." That night, we set up camp in the clearing. I barely slept. The silence pressed against me, a living, breathing thing. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. A single breath. It wasn't from any of us. It came from somewhere in the clearing. I shot up, scanning the darkness. The trees stood motionless. My friends were asleep. But then, Ashley bolted upright, gasping. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We woke the others. Sat in the silence, waiting. And then Kyle Brave, stupid Kyle, stood up and spoke. "Hello, is someone there?" The moment his voice rang out, the silence shattered. A wave of sound hit us all at once. Screaming, deafening, agonized shrieks, filling the clearing from nowhere and everywhere. The trees shook, the ground rumbled, and in the center of it all, shadows, dark. Figures emerging from the trees, gliding toward us, their mouths wide open in silent screams. We ran. We didn't pack, didn't think, just ran. When we finally collapsed miles away, the sounds were gone. The forest was normal again, but Ashley checked her phone, the video she recorded. It had no sound, except for a voice at the very end. "You shouldn't have spoken." My name is Liam, and I know I wasn't alone in that forest. I've always loved hiking, alone, just me, the trees, and the quiet. But last weekend, something changed. Now, I don't think I'll ever go back. I was deep in Redwood Hollow, following an old, barely visible trail. It was already late, but I wasn't worried. I knew my way. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when I first noticed it. The feeling of being watched. At first I ignored it, just my mind playing tricks on me. But as I walked, the feeling grew stronger. My skin prickled. My breath came shorter. The trees around me stretched tall, their branches blocking the sky. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became. Then I saw them. Eyes, glowing, unblinking, dozens of them staring at me from the trees. They weren't animal eyes. They were too big, too still. And worst of all, there were too many. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The eyes didn't move, they just watched. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too small, swallowed by the thick silence. The eyes blinked, all at once, in perfect unison. That's when I ran. Branches whipped against my face as I sprinted down the path. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, I could feel them, keeping pace, moving without sound. Then the path ended. I skidded to a stop, nearly tumbling over the edge of a steep ravine. My heart pounded as I turned, expecting to see them right behind me. But they weren't. The forest was empty. The eyes were gone, shaking. I made my way back to my car, never looking back. But as I reached the parking lot, I felt it again, the weight of unseen eyes. I checked my reflection in the car window, my breath still uneven, and that's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes, staring at me, from inside my own reflection. My name is Nathan, and I can't explain what happened during our last camping trip. I don't think anyone would believe me even if I tried. But I have to write it down because I need to know that I'm not crazy. It was me, my brother Matt, and our two friends, Olivia and Ben. We set up camp deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The first night was perfect warm fire, clear sky, and the quiet hum of nature all around us. But when we woke up the next morning, it was still dark. I remember checking my phone, expecting it to be around dawn. But the screen read 8:14 a.m. Confused, I stepped out of the tent. The air was still, unnaturally so. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just an eerie silence. The sky remained as black as it had been hours before. "It's just overcast," Ben said, rubbing his eyes. "A storm's probably coming." But there were no clouds, no moon, no stars, just an endless, suffocating night. We waited, expecting the sun to rise. It never did. Panic crept in. Olivia checked her watch, had stopped. Matt's phone battery, fully charged the night before, was now dead. Mine wasn't responding. We built a second fire to keep warm, but unease settled over us like a heavy fog. Hours passed, then more. The firewood supply dwindled. Hunger gnawed at our stomachs, and the night stretched on, unbroken and endless. Then came the footsteps, faint, at first, like someone pacing just beyond the trees. Slow, deliberate, circling our camp. "We're not alone," Olivia whispered, gripping my arm. Her face was pale in the dim firelight. Ben grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing, just the endless void of the forest. Then Matt screamed. We turned to see him backing away from the trees, his face drained of color. "There's something out there," he gasped. I saw eyes. We didn't wait to find out what it was. We packed our things in record time and started hiking back the way we had come, or at least, we thought we were. The forest never ended. No matter how far we walked, our camp always reappeared ahead of us. Our footprints in the dirt, the ones we thought we had left behind, were fresh, as if we had never moved at all. And then we saw it, a figure standing just outside the reach of our firelight, tall, unmoving, watching. Olivia sobbed. Ben clutched a pocket knife, though we all knew it wouldn't help. The figure took a step forward, then another. Its movements were unnatural, as if it were struggling to mimic how humans walked. And its face, it had no face. I don't remember what happened next. I only remember waking up in my bed, back home, with dirt under my nails and scratches on my arms. My phone was on my nightstand, its battery full. Matt, Olivia, and Ben don't talk about that night. I don't either. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, the darkness feels different, like it's watching me back. My name is Lucas, and I wish we had never set foot in that cursed place. It was supposed to be a normal camping trip, just me, my girlfriend Haley, and our friends Mark and Sophia. We had been hiking all day and decided to set up camp in a clearing near a small creek. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the forest around us felt peaceful. That peace didn't last long. While gathering firewood, Mark stumbled upon an old wooden cabin, half hidden behind thick bushes. "Guys, check this out," he called, waving us over. The cabin looked ancient. The wood was rotten, the windows covered in grime, and the door slightly ajar. Something about it made my skin crawl, but Mark was already stepping inside. "We should go back," Haley whispered, grabbing my arm. But it was too late inside. The air was thick with dust, and a terrible smell lingered, something old and rotting. The furniture was overturned, the floor littered with broken glass and decayed papers. On the far wall, strange symbols were carved into the wood, their meaning unknown. Sophia shuddered. "I don't like this. Let's go." As if on cue, the front door slammed shut behind us. Haley screamed. Mark rushed to the door, yanking at the handle. It stuck. He yelled, his voice laced with panic. Then the whispers started. Low, at first, like the wind slipping through the cracks. But then they grew, overlapping, coming from everywhere. Words we couldn't understand, voices that weren't our own. The room darkened, the air pressing in around us like invisible hands squeezing our throats. Then, we saw them. Figures moved in the shadows, shifting just out of sight. Tall, gaunt, their eyes hollow and black. They stood in the corners of the cabin, watching. Sophia sobbed, clinging to Mark. "Please, let us out," she begged. The whispers turned to laughter. The floor beneath us groaned, and the walls began to close in. I could barely breathe, the space around us growing impossibly tight. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the door creaked open on its own. We didn't hesitate. We bolted out of the cabin, running until we reached our camp, our lungs burning. When we turned back to look, the cabin was gone. Only a patch of dead, blackened earth remained where it had stood. We didn't stay to question it. We packed our things and left immediately. But even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearing those whispers echoing in my ears. And when I look into the dark corners of my room, I wonder if they followed us home. My name is Adam, and I never believed in ghost stories until the night my best friend disappeared without a trace. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. Just me, my girlfriend Brooke, and our friends Jason and Olivia. We drove out to a remote camping site, miles away from civilization. The air was crisp, the fire was warm, and the night felt perfect. But everything changed on the second night. Jason was the first to vanish. He had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, stepping just beyond the fire's glow into the trees. We barely noticed him leave, assuming he'd be back in a few minutes. But those minutes stretched into half an hour, then an hour. When we called his name, there was no response. Brooke and Olivia started to panic. Maybe he got lost, Olivia suggested, her voice trembling. "That's impossible," I said. "He had his flashlight. He wouldn't just wander off." We searched the area for hours, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deeper we went into the woods, the more wrong everything felt. The trees seemed taller, the silence more oppressive. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, we found Jason's flashlight. It was lying in the middle of a small clearing, still on, its beam pointing into the abyss of the trees. But Jason was nowhere to be seen. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Just his flashlight, left, as if he had simply evaporated into the night. Panic set in. We ran back to camp, locked ourselves in our tents, and tried to convince ourselves that he would come back. But deep down, we knew he wouldn't. The real horror began when we found the footprints. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, we saw them footprints circling our tents. Not just Jason's, but someone else's. Someone barefoot, whose prints were too long and too deep to be human. Brooke gasped, pointing at the prints. "They weren't here last night," she whispered. That was the final straw. We packed up as quickly as we could and bolted for the car, leaving everything behind. But as we drove off, I made the mistake of looking in the rearview mirror. There, standing at the tree line, was Jason. Only it wasn't him. His head was tilted too far to the side, his arms hanging limply at his sides, and even from that distance, I could see his mouth stretched into an unnatural, inhuman grin. I floored the gas pedal. Jason was never found, but every so often, I have nightmares where I'm back in that forest, standing in that clearing, staring at his abandoned flashlight, and in those nightmares, I hear my name being whispered from the trees. My name is Daniel, and what happened to us during that camping trip still haunts me to this day. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just me, my girlfriend Sarah, and our two best friends, Jake and Emily. We drove deep into the forest, far from any other campers, looking for the perfect spot to set up our tents. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles filling our lungs as we laughed and joked around. The first night was peaceful. We sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows, sharing ghost stories, and enjoying the warmth of the flames. But when we woke up the next morning, something felt off. Jake was the first to notice the footprints. They weren't ours. They circled our tents, uneven and strangely deep in the damp soil. Maybe an animal, Emily suggested, but even she didn't seem convinced. The prints were human, but the spacing between them was unnatural, too long, as if whoever made them was taking impossibly large steps. We brushed it off, pretending it wasn't a big deal. But that night, as we sat by the fire again, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest around us seemed eerily silent. No owls hooting, no leaves rustling in the breeze. Just silence. Then, I saw it. A shadow standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, unmoving, watching. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Sarah, my voice barely above a breath. She turned her head and gasped, gripping my arm tightly. The others followed our gaze, and as if on cue, the shadow slipped back into the darkness of the trees. Jake jumped to his feet, grabbing a flashlight. "Who's out there?" he shouted. No response. He aimed the light into the trees, but there was nothing. Just the empty woods, stretching endlessly around us. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound made my heart race. And in the morning, the footprints were back this time, even closer to our tents. Panic set in. We decided to cut our trip short and leave as soon as we packed up. But as we hurriedly stuffed our gear into our backpacks, Emily let out a strangled cry. There, on the trunk of a nearby tree, was a message carved into the bark. "Don't leave, I like watching." My blood ran cold. We didn't waste another second. We ran to the car, throwing our gear inside without care. As I started the engine, I dared to look back one last time. A figure stood at the edge of the trees, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, watching us with an intensity that sent ice through my veins. And as we sped away down the dirt road, I swear I saw it step forward 1, 2, 3 long strides before the trees swallowed it whole. We never went camping again. My name is Ethan, and I will never forget the night the forest spoke to us. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, me, my best friend Kyle, his girlfriend Lily, and my sister Rachel. We had all grown up together, and this was meant to be our last adventure before we went our separate ways for college. We set up camp in a quiet clearing, the scent of pine thick in the cool night air. The first evening was perfect, toasting marshmallows, telling scary stories, and laughing under the starlit sky. But as midnight approached, the wind shifted, carrying with it a strange sound, soft whispers drifting through the trees. "Did you hear that?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all stopped talking, straining our ears. The wind rustled the leaves, but beneath it, there was something else, something human. Lily laughed nervously. "It's probably just the wind playing tricks on us." Kyle nodded, though he didn't look convinced. "Yeah, let's just go to bed. We've got a long hike in the morning." We turned in for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. The whispering grew louder, words just on the edge of understanding. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. Was it coming from the trees, or inside my own head? The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, like I hadn't slept at all. Judging by the dark circles under everyone's eyes, I wasn't the only one. Over breakfast, Rachel finally spoke up. "I heard voices last night." We all exchanged uneasy glances. "Me too," Kyle admitted. "And it wasn't just the wind. They were saying something." I felt my stomach twist. "What did they say?" He hesitated. "I don't know. It was just whispers, but I felt like they were trying to tell me something, like they were inside my head." That night, the whispers returned, clearer this time. They called our names. I bolted upright, sweat dripping down my neck. I could hear Rachel in the other tent, gasping for breath. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped my tent, finding her sitting up, trembling. "Ethan," she whispered. They said my name. I turned to wake Kyle and Lily, but their tent was empty. My pulse spiked. The fire had burned down to embers, their backpacks still where we had left them. They wouldn't have just left without telling us. Rachel and I grabbed our flashlights and searched the area. "Kyle, Lily," I shouted into the dark. No answer. Then from deep within the forest, the whispers rose in unison. "We have them now." A chill ran through my body. The sound didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere. We ran. We left everything behind, our tents, our bags, even our shoes. We ran until we saw the glint of Rachel's car under the moonlight. As soon as we locked the doors, the whispers stopped. We waited until sunrise before driving back to camp. Kyle and Lily were never found. Their belongings remained untouched. The police chalked it up to a simple disappearance, but I know better. The forest took them, and if we had stayed a moment longer, it would have taken us too.